As Grandma raised her glass for her birthday toast, my sister stood up and calmly announced, "Amanda's not who she says she is." A hush fell over the garden as a stranger stepped forward and dropped a manila folder onto the table. Inside were photos, receipts, and what looked like undeniable proof of betrayal. My husband froze. My mother gasped. And I felt every eye on me, waiting for my perfect life to shatter in real time. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Melissa always envied quietly, with the patience of someone waiting for a storm to prove her right. In photos, you'd see her next to me, always smiling, always close, but her eyes told a different story. They flicked sideways when our uncle complimented my composure, narrowed slightly when our mom gushed about Calvin's promotion. It was subtle, but I saw it. I always saw it. You learn to track the eyes of someone who's measuring your worth like a ledger, hoping yours finally slips into the red. I used to try harder with her. Bought her a new laptop when hers broke down. Sat with her through every sob story about her exes. Ethan the liar, Jacob the ghoster, Chris the artistic soul who wasn't ready to commit. I nodded, encouraged, even bit my tongue when she asked for job referrals for industries she knew nothing about. It wasn't pity. It was hope. Hope that maybe, if I stood still long enough, she'd stop seeing me as a moving target. But she never did. Melissa didn't hate me the way villains hate heroes. It was worse. She thought I was fake. A glossy surface with cracks no one else could see. And somewhere along the way, that suspicion curdled into certainty. So when Grandma's 80th approached, the one event everyone marked in red on the calendar, I should have known. She offered to take care of the drinks like it was an act of generosity. But I saw the glint in her eyes, the too bright smile. Melissa didn't do passive roles. She needed a front row seat to whatever she was planning. I should have noticed the strangers. The man with a too-new camera pretending to photograph flowers. The woman who asked oddly specific questions about where I bought my necklace, whether Calvin had arrived yet, what I did exactly for work. But I was too busy making sure the floral arch didn't collapse, that Grandma's cushion was thick enough, that the violinist knew to play her wedding song at sunset. I wanted perfection. Not for myself, but for the woman who raised us both. And meanwhile, Melissa was orchestrating something else entirely. She didn't just want to ruin a party. She wanted to rewrite the story the family told about me, and she believed she had enough pages of evidence to do it. Melissa didn't see herself as vindictive. To her, this was justice, or at the very least, balance. For years, she'd convinced herself that I curated my life like a performance, and that everyone else had bought front-row tickets without question. Every compliment I received, every invitation to speak at a charity gala or headline a financial panel, became a pebble in her shoe. It wasn't about what I did. It was about what she believed I refused to show. Her request for a loan 2 years ago was more than a business pitch. It was a test, one she believed I failed. I remember the phone call, the rehearsed enthusiasm in her voice, the flurry of half-baked ideas about yoga retreats and luxury healing kits, the vague mention of a celebrity partnership that never quite materialized. I listened. I didn't laugh. I asked questions, and then I said no. What I didn't say, what I'll never say aloud, is that the very next day I paid off the remaining balance of her student debt. Anonymously. I watched the confirmation email roll in while sipping burnt office coffee. She never knew, and I intended to keep it that way. Not because I wanted moral high ground, but because I knew how deeply she resented the idea of needing help, especially from me. So when I saw her that day, sipping wine under the linen tent, laughing with cousins she usually avoided, I felt the undercurrent. Her calm was too deliberate. Her dress too pristine, her smile too sharp. She was dressed for war, not for Grandma. The private investigators blended in well enough. One feigned interest in Grandma's scrapbook collection, snapping candids with a DSLR that had no memory card. The other lingered near Calvin, asking how we met, where he worked, if we traveled often. There was something predatory in their friendliness, like wolves playing fetch. And then, as the sun turned amber behind the hedges and Grandma lifted her glass for a toast, Melissa stood. Her words sliced through the air with surgical precision. "I think it's time we stop pretending." No one moved. Even the jazz trio on the patio stopped mid-song. She gestured, and the man beside her, a square-jawed stranger in a too-tight blazer, produced a manila folder and dropped it onto the table like a gavel. The paper inside was crisp, uncreased, fresh from a printer. Melissa hadn't just planned this. She'd rehearsed it. Bank statements with my name, hotel invoices, pixelated photos of me in a parking lot, arms around someone who wasn't my husband. Calvin stiffened beside me. My mother's breath hitched. Somewhere behind me, a wine glass cracked against a tile. Melissa, for once, was calm, triumphant. And I hadn't seen it coming. Not like this. It wasn't rage that surfaced first. It was a clarity so sharp it felt like breath after drowning. I hadn't moved at first. Not when Melissa accused me of cheating. Not when Calvin's fingers went stiff around his wine glass. Not even when Grandma's hand trembled as she set down her toast. But then I saw the look in Melissa's eyes. Not conviction, not pain, but satisfaction. And something inside me shifted. I crossed the lawn, heels silent on the grass, and picked up the photos like they were old receipts from a dinner no one remembered. The silence around me felt thick, suffocating. All eyes were glued to my hands, waiting to see if the woman they thought they knew would disintegrate under scrutiny. "That man in the photo?" My voice was steady, each syllable deliberate. "That's Eric, my cousin on Dad's side. He came out when he was 17. He's been helping me plan Grandma's surprise video montage." The silence stuttered. A few eyes darted toward Melissa. "You see hotel receipts," I continued, flipping through the file. "Because I was booking space at the Cambria Suites for out-of-town guests. You saw me hugging someone in a parking garage? I hug my family, Melissa. Not everything is a scandal." I could see her face beginning to warp. Eyebrows drawn, jaw tight, hands clenched just enough to turn her knuckles white. She was recalculating, rewriting. "And the transactions?" I held up the final page, lines of blurred print and bank names highlighted in neon yellow. "They're yours. You've been getting anonymous transfers for over a year. Did you think that money came from a magic fairy godmother?" Confusion bloomed across her face, delicate as panic. She looked to the PI as if to say, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I turned toward Calvin. He nodded. "She told me everything," he said. Calm, certain. "She set up a trust in your name, Melissa, for your next idea. She didn't want you to know yet. She wanted it to feel like hope, not pity. And that was the unraveling thread." Melissa's mask faltered. The PI beside her, clearly not paid enough for this, stepped away and muttered, "We were misinformed." The spell broke. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a slow building storm. Disbelief, embarrassment, a few outright gasps. My mother looked like she might cry. Not for me, but for the daughter who had just imploded in public. And then, in the thick silence, Grandma rose. At 80, she had the presence of a judge and the memory of a ledger. Her voice was calm, but final. "You owe her an apology," she said. "But more than that, you owe her the truth. And Melissa, for once, had no words. Her voice broke before the words fully formed. Melissa's lips quivered, the edges of her composure collapsing like paper in rain. "I didn't think she'd ever forgive me," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. It wasn't a performance anymore. There was no crowd to win over, no stage to dominate, just a woman, stripped of illusion, trembling in the debris of her own sabotage. The confession came in a rush, unedited and bruising. She spoke of the childhood birthdays where I got the piano solos and she got the off-key duets, of the way adults told her, "Be more like Amanda," as though I were the mold and she the misprint. She said she hated how I never seemed to struggle, how my hair stayed in place, how my laugh didn't falter, how my life moved forward even when hers cracked sideways. She admitted she had believed I pitied her, that every kind gesture felt laced with condescension, that my silence about her failures sounded louder than any words, that it was easier to imagine I was hiding something awful than accept I might simply be trying to love her without demanding she become anything other than who she was. "I thought," she said, voice barely audible, "if I could expose you, just once, then I'd stop being the shadow." I didn't raise my voice, didn't reach for sympathy. I walked the last few steps and stood across from her, not as her mirror, but as her sister. "You were never second," I said, steady and quiet. "You just refused to believe you were already enough." The air was thick with stillness. No one clapped. No one murmured a platitude. Even Grandma said nothing at first. The silence didn't beg to be filled. It deserved to echo. That night, Calvin and I left before the cake was cut. The party continued in motion, but the energy had shifted, less festive, more reflective. Grandma hugged me at the car, her hands cool and strong. "You handled it with more grace than I would have," she whispered.